Having mentioned about the various types of fibers, yarns and fabrics, both woven and knitted, non-wovens, and the various products that have been produced from these materials, we are now going to discuss the dyeing and printing of these textile materials. Dyeing is nothing but adding color to the material, and it is a common thing in nature to see the colors in the leaves of the tree, or sky has got a color, and we have so many types of color in the sky. At the time of sunset, a orange color; at the time of sunrise, then we have seen these rainbow also in the sky whenever it rains, and green atmosphere where we have the lush plants which are being grown. So color is something which we find in nature, and we have got attraction towards certain colors. We have a liking for a certain color. Somebody likes blue, somebody likes red, somebody likes bluish green or green, and that is necessary because so many colors should exist to be used in the garment or in yarns and other things. Now, the color is imported by a coloring matter which is called dye. The coloring matter is available in nature. If we take these leaves and then dry them and then crush them, for example, onion leaves, if we collect them after they have been used and then crush them, we get a sort of a color in them. And the turmeric powder which is grown, we get an yellow color from that, and like that so many colors are available in nature. The beetroot plant, that vegetable, is well known for its violet color, carrot for its orange color. So many vegetables are there which have got color in them, and the color attracts us to be used as a garment, or either in the dyed fabric or in the printed fabric. First we will take up dyeing and then later on take up this printing. Now, India is well known for natural dyes which were used time immemorial, and Indians had the expertise in dyeing the fabric using the natural dye, and so many types of products also were in vogue. Kalamkari prints and Bandhani prints, they are all traditionally produced printed fabrics. And somewhere in the year 1857 or so, one scientist came out with synthetic dye. His name is W.H. Perkin. Accidentally he discovered a dye which had this coloring matter, and it was called mauve, which is a coloring matter. Now, Perkin's discovery of mauve has opened up so many possibilities in dyeing of these fabrics. It is the first synthetic dye which was produced and which was used for dyeing many materials. Before that, we were using these natural dyes, and all said and done, natural dyes have got a lot of deficiencies. They have plus and minus points. Plus points are that they are eco-friendly. We cannot say that all the natural dyes are non-toxic in nature. There are certain dyes which are toxic in nature and which should not be used. But overall, they are all preferred because of environmentally good nature. And also another fact why natural dyes are being preferred is, some years ago, it was found that many of these aquatic creatures like fish and other things perished when the effluent from a dye house was let out, and they happened to be in that atmosphere. So that gave some suspicion that certain dyes have ill effects on these aquatic creatures like fish. And later on it was found that those dyes had certain groups like benzidine and then these azoic groups and all that, which are found to be quite toxic to the human being, pentachlorophenol. These are all some of the chemicals which have been identified and which cause this toxicity in the dyes. And after careful analysis of the ill effects that are caused by these various dyes to the human beings as well, they were banned. In fact, earlier it was banned in Germany and then India followed suit from them. And so many dyes had to be dispensed with because of their ill effects to the human being. And some natural dyes were preferred because they were free from this environmental problem. And this Perkins' discovery of mauve is a very important landmark, I should say. And so many types of dyes were produced in the industry, Giga and ICI, so many products are there. And today we find that the dyestuff industry supplies dyes to the dyers which are having good fastness properties. And there are certain types of dyes which are exclusively used for dyeing knitted fabrics. In Tirupur, they use only reactive dyes or bifunctional dyes. So, the first synthetic dye was introduced by W.H. Perkin in the year 1856, which had a purple color, and that was the beginning of the synthetic fiber, synthetic dye industry. And after that, many industries have started producing these dyes, and in India also there were many industries making these dyes, and Indochem, to mention a few. And the coal tar dyes, as they are called. A dye is a substance which provides coloring matter to the material. And some dyes, as we will see, are soluble in water, and some dyes are insoluble in water, and how they are applied onto the textile materials we will see. Now, there are two coloring matters in the dye which are called oxochrome and chromogen. The dyes are classified on two bases. One is on the method of application and another one based on their structure. It is better to consider the classification based on their mode of application rather than taking up their structure. Now, we have dyes which are meant for dyeing cotton, for dyeing wool, for dyeing silk, and for dyeing synthetic fibers such as acrylic fibers or polyester or nylon. And there are certain fibers which are very difficult to dye. Polypropylene is a case in point. So we have to do some other modification to see that the material is dyed. First we will take up cotton material. Cotton is a cellulosic fiber. So for dyeing cotton we have direct dyes, then reactive, VAT, naphthols, sulphur. There are certain dyes which are called they are soluble in water and they can be easily applied onto the textile material, and in certain cases, for example in VAT, it is insoluble in water. And we will take up this direct dye and its application onto the cotton materials. the dye is normally applied on the basis of the weight. The shade, for example, is represented in terms of 0.1% or 2% or 5%. The direct dyes are also called substantive dyes. That means soluble in water. So, a 5% shade is darker than that of the 0.1% shade. And the dye stuff manufacturers provide a literature or a booklet wherein they show the various materials dyed at different concentration of the dye. So, if a person wants to know whether he has dyed a material to a particular concentration, after dyeing that material he matches with that, and then he is satisfied that the color which he has obtained is as per the expectations. And the color is also another point which will be taken up later, how it is being measured and how important it is to the dyer. Now, how the shade is developed onto the material, we will spend a few minutes on that. Suppose we have 100 grams of material, whether it is fiber or yarn or fabric. Incidentally, dyeing can be carried out on any shape of the material, whether it is a fiber or a yarn or a fabric, even garments can be dyed. And suppose the weight of the material is 100 grams, 0.1% shade means 0.1 divided by 100 into 100. That is 0.1 of a gram of dye is required for dyeing that 100 grams material. And 5% means 5 grams of the material are required for dyeing 100 grams of the material. So, the quantity of dye stuff increases as the percentage concentration increases. And how the dyeing is carried out? Dye solution is used, but there are certain other auxiliaries which are used. For example, common salt or Glauber salt is called the exhaustive agent. Common salt is NaCl and Glauber salt is Na2SO4, sodium sulfate. Now, to get the percentage of shade required, provided we have a stock solution, for example, let us say we have got a 10% dye solution, which means that 10 grams are added to 100 cc of water, or it could mean 100 grams in 1 liter. It means the same thing. So, having prepared this dye stuff solution, and if the weight of the material is 100 grams, the W into P divided by C will give you the amount of solution that is to be added, where W is the weight of the material, P is the percentage shade, and C is the concentration of the dye stuff solution. For example, if this is 100 and percentage shade is 1% and this concentration of the dye solution prepared is 10, so 10 cc of this one is taken, and then what we have is called a material to liquor ratio. This material to liquor ratio is of crucial importance because it decides the quantity of water that is to be used. And as you will appreciate, if you use less quantity of water for dyeing, it is welcome because of the low cost that is involved. And if you can carry out the dyeing at room temperature instead of at an elevated temperature, that is also desirable because it will lead to cost reduction and economies in dyeing. Usually 1:30 is the liquor ratio that is used. For every 1 gram of material, 30 cc of water is used. So, for 100 into 30, like that we calculate the amount of liquor, which is water, that is required, and 10 cc of solution is added to that. So we make the total volume as 3000 cc. That is 3000 minus this 10 is the water, because dye solution has been added to that. And we take this electrolyte or common salt as it is called, which is used as an exhausting agent, and that is about 1% or so. We add to that and raise the temperature to around 90 degrees centigrade for about 30 minutes. This is the duration of dyeing. So after that, the color is developed on the material and it is washed and taken up. This is how the application of the direct dye is carried out on cotton. If it is viscose rayon, the same procedure is followed. If it is jute or any cellulosic material that is to be taken up for dyeing, the same procedure is being followed for that. And the most important points in dyeing are temperature, concentration, and duration of the treatment. We don't want to keep the material for a long time because it is not economical. At the same time, keeping the material for dyeing for a very short time will lead to uneven dyeing. So some balance is struck and we carry out the dyeing. Now this direct dye is cheap. It has got several colors, red, yellow, blue, green, so on and so forth. But the disadvantage of direct dye is that it has got very poor fastness. What is fastness? Suppose a dyed material is exposed to sunlight, the color fades. It shows that it has got very poor light fastness. When it is laundered and the color is lost, it shows that it has got poor laundry fastness or wash fastness, as we call it. Fastness is tested against various agencies such as the light, perspiration, then weather, and in certain cases to rubbing and washing. The ability of the material to retain the dye even after certain operations are carried out is called the fastness property. Suppose the color is retained. How do we find the fastness of a dyed material? In a very simple way. First we take the material which is dyed. One half of it is covered with a black paper. The other half is exposed to the sun for a week. And after exposure to the atmosphere for a week, this is removed and then both the shaded parts are compared. Suppose there is no difference at all between the covered portion and the uncovered portion, and after exposure to the atmosphere for a week, it is said that there is no change in the fastness properties, and fastness properties of the dye are excellent. On the other hand, if there is a fading, then the fastness is poor. Now fastness is given certain ratings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and for color it is up to 8. So there is what is called a grayscale. A grayscale is something like a notebook in the middle, and it contains the portions. These are two exactly similar. There is some change here, there is more change here, and there is more change, even more changes are there, and this is quite different from the other. So after removing this, we just compare with this grayscale and find out where exactly it fits. Suppose there is no change at all, that means fastness is very good, 5. 5 of a rating is given. So the scales are 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 3 and 4 refer to poor fastness properties, 5 refers to a good fastness properties. The fastness properties can be checked against light, washing, then perspiration, and so many other agencies also, and rubbing. Some dyes are having very poor rubbing fastness, like naphthols it had, and some reactive dyes also are having poor fastness properties. And the scientific way of assessing the fastness property is use computer color matching. system. Here we find out the reflectance value from which KBS value is calculated, 1 minus R the whole square divided by 2R, where R is the reflectance. And suppose the material is washed and then the KBS value is determined using a computer color matching system. And before washing we have the KBS value and both are identical, it means that the fastness is excellent. Suppose there is a drop in the KBS value following washing, that means that the wash fastness is poor. Or after exposure to the sunlight, the fastness is found to be poor. So this is a better way of checking the fastness compared to using the grayscale, which is somewhat it is inaccurate, so to say, whereas the computer color matching system is accurate. Now cotton can also be dyed using reactive dyes. As I mentioned to you, the knitted fabrics which are produced in Tirupur are invariably dyed using reactive dyes. There are so many types of reactive dyes: cold brand, Prussians as they are called, then hot brand, high exhaustion or bifunctional dyes, so called bifunctional dyes. And vinyl sulfone group. Monochlorotriazine is the compound that is used in reactive. Here the method of dyeing is also quite different in the sense that the color is fixed by covalent bonding. What is covalent bonding? It gives very good strength to the material. For example, a fiber, when it is tested in the longitudinal direction, it possesses higher strength. That is due to covalent bonding. There are other types of bonding such as ionic bonding, weak van der Waals forces, etc. And it is a sort of a chemical reaction, and these reactive dyes were developed by a scientist called Ratti in the year 1956. So Ratti's discovery of reactive dyes has resulted in so many advantages to the industry because they are used for dyeing these yarns, fibers, yarns and fabrics. So the method of application of reactive dye to the cotton involves, first we add the exhausting agent, that is salt, preferably Glauber salt, and then fixing agent, that is sodium sulphate. The quantity of salt that is added depends on the shade that we would like to get. The darker the shade, the more addition of the salt. And the addition of salt to the dye bath has posed a lot of problems in the sense that the effluent problems. The effluent, when it contains a very high quantity of salt, the effluent that comes out cannot be used unless the salt is removed. So people thought of dyeing the textile materials using reactive dyes with less salt or with no salt at all, so that the effluent problem can be taken care of. And there are certain chemicals, polymeric substances, which when applied onto the textile materials can be dyed without salt. A lot of studies have been made on dyeing of cotton materials using reactive dyes without salt or with less salt, and some progress has been made in this direction. And another problem that is involved in this reactive dye is some 40 to 50% of the dye is hydrolyzed, and then the dye becomes like a direct dye. So certain compounds are added to the dye bath to see that the hydrolyzation is not existing and the full advantage is taken of the reactive dyes. So this problem of this some of the percentage of the dye getting hydrolyzed has been recognized, and suitable chemicals have been used to avoid this problem. And since reactive dyes are used extensively for the dyeing of these cotton materials, the problems associated with them also have been studied in great detail. The effluent that is present in this bath is tested by various methods called BOD, biological oxygen demand, COD, and TDS. TDS stands for total dissolved solids. And hot brand dyes are used where the temperature is raised to 70 degrees centigrade. Then bifunctional dyes. These are dyes which are quite expensive but which give very good fastness properties to the dyed materials. Seba dyes are examples for this. And the next dye is a vinyl sulfone, which is generally used in printing. Of these four methods which are used for dyeing cotton materials, it is the cold brand dyes which have found a lot of advantages because of its lower energy costs and the ease with which the dyes can be applied onto the material in the cold bath. And we have a pad steam process also in the case of dyeing of materials using these reactive dyes. Padding. Dyeing can be done in so many ways. One is called exhaust dyeing. In exhaust dyeing, we prepare a bath and the solution is being kept here. The material is immersed in that one, and after some time, the concentration of the dye solution reduces because of the offtake by these materials. And this exhaust dyeing is used in jigger, which is a machine used for dyeing these cotton materials. In jigger, the material passes through and then it is wound onto that. Again it is unwound and then wound onto that. Again it is passed through the solution and wound. Like that 3 to 4 rounds are done and the material gets the dye. What is padding? In padding, we prepare a solution consisting of the dye and this exhausting agent also. Then it is impregnated in that solution and passed through 2 rollers to squeeze out the excess moisture, and it is wrapped and kept for about 16 hours, during which time the dye is made to develop and penetrate the fabric. So, pad batch method, as it is called, has several advantages in the sense that the liquor that is used is considerably less compared to the exhaust dyeing, but it is only suitable for certain types of dyes like low temperature dyeing or Prussian dyes and cannot be used for dyeing the fabric at an elevated temperature. So pad batch method has been exploited in the case of the reactive dyes in order to get a lot of economies. But one problem with regard to these reactive dyes is that rubbing fastness is poor and also wash fastness is poor in certain cases. But nevertheless, these dyes find extensive application in the industry. So now we will pass on to VAT dyes. VAT dyes have got exceptionally good fastness to cotton and it is very expensive. Its application is also a little difficult. These are insoluble dyes and made to become soluble dyes by what is called as a Calicos compound. So sodium hydrosulfite is added to the bath, which changes the color of the dye, which is called a Luco compound. And in the presence of Luco compound, the material is dyed, and after the dyeing is over, some alkali is also added to the bath. It is exposed to the atmosphere to get back the dye. And the restoration of the dye can be done by various methods, by exposing it to atmosphere or passing oxygen. And wet dyes have very good fastness property, but they are prone to this unevenness in dyeing if the concentration of the dyes are not properly maintained. And so one will have to be very careful in applying these wet dyes onto cotton. The machines that are used for dyeing wet dyes are jigger. Jumbo jiggers can be used, and yarn is dyed using wet dyes for the production of check shirting or stripe shirting, lungis, etc. And many modifications have been made to these wet dyes in order to apply them very easily, what are called solubilized wet dyes. There is no need to add sodium hydrosulfide to them. So in 1922, two scientists, Bader and Sankar, developed these solubilized wet dyes, Bader and Sander. So this dye also is being used for dyeing of the cotton materials. Viscose rayon can be dyed, or any other natural fiber like the present day advanced cellulosic fibers like tencel, modal and bamboo, and so many other types of fibers can be dyed using these solubilized wet dyes. Now, naphthol dyes were used earlier, but today they find very little application or no application at all, because of the fact that most of the naphthol dyes have been banned because of the presence of this ill effects, that is this azoic group and the pentachlorophenol and other things, azo groups and all that, which are present in that. So at one time where the cotton fabrics were dyed using the naphthol dyes, today they have reverted to the reactive dyes now. And naphthol dyes were found to be very useful because some of the dark shades in red, scarlet red, blue and black we had. And naphthol dyeing involves two stages. One is Brenthal impregnation and developing the color in a base. And the cost of dyeing is also cheaper, but unfortunately most of these dyes were banned on the grounds that they contain these azo groups. And one information also I should provide to you. Some 25 years ago, our government of India set up many laboratories at different parts of India in order to provide facilities for testing the dyed material for these banned dyes. So all the laboratories were equipped with this atomic spectrophotometer and gas chromatography and so many other instruments which were very useful for identifying this azo group. And only after checking the material that they don't have this azo group will they be certified as suitable for use. So that was the situation, and many were given training on this testing of these eco-friendly dyes. So many eco laboratories were set up in India for helping the industry, and today we find that all these have helped a great deal in identifying the dyes which are to be used for dyeing and to take appropriate measures. Any dye, any fabric that is dyed using a natural dye and which is free from toxicity doesn't pose any problem at all. For example, socks which are dyed, or sweaters or t-shirts and all that, even saris also, which are dyed using these eco-friendly dyes, they are not exempted from export. And one more point is that organic cotton is also being grown in our country in order to see that the cotton doesn't pose any problem. Organic cotton is one which is grown with pesticiders. And a number of spinning mills in India have started spinning yarn using this organic cotton. So, next is the sulphur dye. Sulphur dyes are never used now. They were very poor, they had very poor rubbing fastness. And so let us not talk about the sulphur dyes now. Then metal complex dyes were used, which are very similar to these acid dyes. Now let us take up acid dyes, which are used for dyeing wool and silk. So here the dyeing is carried out by using acetic acid. And now we come to a very important dyeing, disperse dyes, which are exclusively used for dyeing polyester and nylon. Now, in dyeing polyester using the disperse dyes, we have four methods also. One is what is called as the normal dyeing using a carrier dyeing. Then high pressure, high temperature. Jet dyeing. Then thermosol dyeing. Carriers are used in the dyeing of polyester using disperse dyes. What is a carrier? As the name itself indicates, it helps in the dyeing of the material using these disperse dyes. Carriers are phenolic compounds, and there are as many as 7 types of carriers which are used. The one problem with regard to the carrier is that when they are used, the whole atmosphere is polluted, which are not desirable for the dyers and all. And some of the carriers remain on the fabric after dyeing, which interferes with their use and other things and all, the presence of the carrier in the fabric after the dyeing is over. But nevertheless, in India, many industries are dyeing polyester using carrier. There are Temescal, a commercial name for a carrier, and this is used for dyeing. So in the bath, the carrier is added and dyeing is carried out at 70 degrees centigrade. And the carriers do the job of suppressing the glass transition temperature of the polymer. And that is the role as a carrier. See, for example, nylon can be dyed at room temperature because it has got a very low glass transition temperature compared to polyester. So if polyester is to be dyed using the disperse dye, carrier should be used. Then high pressure, high temperature dyeing. Dyeing is carried out at temperature of 130 to 140 degrees centigrade by winding the fabric onto a package or a roller, and steam is passed through that. The fabric is stationary, and after 2.5 hours to 3 hours the material gets dyeing, dyed, and that is the way that the polyester fabric is dyed using high temperature, high pressure dyeing machine. Most of the industries use these high pressure HPHT, as it is called, for the dyeing of polyester. And jet dyeing, it is also similar to high temperature, high pressure dyeing, except that the material is moving, whereas in the case of HPHT it is stationary. And jet dyeing is also used in the dyeing of knitted fabrics, what is called as the that is high temperature dyeing in the case of the knitted fabric, and we get very good shades. In jet dyeing, the material to liquor ratio used is also much less, say about 1:7 instead of 1:30. Now let us take up this thermosol dyeing now. In thermosol dyeing, the material is padded with a solution containing the dispersed dye, and then it is dried, and then it is heat set at a temperature of 200 degrees centigrade for about 4 minutes, during which time the dye is fixed onto the material. And one of the limitations of this thermosol method is that it is only suitable for pale shades, and dark shades can never be obtained. And it is for 1 minute, the 200 degrees centigrade for 1 minute it is being heat set. So this process is also called thermoset, and but meters of fabrics are being dyed using this thermosol elsewhere in USA, and they produce these lighter shades for the fabric, and the fabric is found to be quite acceptable, and it is on par with the other dyed material. Now something about this color fastness to washing, fastness to color we have covered. Fastness to light, fastness to perspiration, one thing about this dyeing is that no single color is used for dyeing. It is always the combination of dyes which is being used for producing a shade. And so many shades are being developed to cater to the requirements of the garment industry. And the computer color matching system finds a very good application in this. Computer color matching system helps us to find out the recipe for dyeing, and for quality control aspects like checking the fastness of the dyes and other things, and it is also used to calibrate some of the shades. So a laboratory which is having this computer color matching system is able to supply the required shades to the customer and help them. So the use of the computer color matching system in dyeing cannot be overemphasized. We should mention something about this jet dyeing. Jet dyeing was used earlier for the dyeing of polyester textile yarn, and then later on this technology was also adapted to dyeing knitted fabrics, and the machines were called soft flow machines. Earlier the knitted fabrics were dyed using winch, which consumed a considerable amount of water, So when they were replaced by short flow machines, the material to liquor ratio fell drastically to 1:7, and in so many ways it was of great use to the dyers because less quantity of water is required for dyeing these knitted fabrics. And moreover, the performance of the knitted fabrics was also found to be very good in relation to dyeing those fabrics using this winch material. And I told you about the thermosol method of dyeing this polyester material. It is also called heat press dyeing or thermal dyeing, because heat is used for fixing these dispersed dyes onto the material. And in dyeing, as I said, that 2 or 3 colors are mixed and then used. No single color is used for dyeing the material. And this color mixing and the shade formation can easily be studied using a computer color matching system. And so many recipes have been developed to facilitate the dyeing industry to produce several shades. And for dyeing of cotton materials, we use jiggers, which use the exhaust method. And for dyeing, we use cabinet dyeing machine, Hanks. And for fiber dyeing, we use maybe a fiber dyeing machine, or for dyeing these yarns, they are dyed in the form of a cone. So we have cone dyeing machines. And the yarns which are dyed fetch a higher price, and it is one way of value addition. And in the production of this striped material or also this check material, the use of these colored yarns is quite widespread. And the dyes that are used for dyeing the yarns are invariably vat dyes, which have got exceptionally good fastness properties. And we had so many types of machines also for dyeing, for finishing as well. The dyeing can be carried out in fiber form or yarn or hanks, fabric, beams, for example denim. The warp yarn is dyed in denim manufacture and then it is used. So we find that dyeing is used in some way or other in textile processing in order to create certain variety or to produce certain fashionable garments. We talked about chambray fabric, which makes use of a colored warp and a white weft. So the garments also can be dyed. Socks can be dyed after manufacture. T-shirts can be dyed. And the fiber dyed material is also used in the manufacture of suiting. One commercial name of suiting is Savile Row, which makes use of fiber dyed material. And it gives a very good appearance and quite expensive also, because dyed fibers are used in the manufacture of these suitings. And one can easily find out also whether the fabric is piece dyed or whether the yarn that is used is dyed in that one, or the fiber that is used is dyed in that one, by making certain tests and all. And the type of dye that is used also can be easily identified. For example, a direct dyed fabric, when it is heated with 5% caustic soda solution, will result in removal of all the dye. And a vat dyed material, suppose we put a drop of sodium hydrosulfite on that material, the Luco compound will appear, which will show that it has been dyed using a vat dye. And for reactive dyes also, there are tests to confirm that these reactive dyes have been used. And this is done with a view to checking the right type, whether the right type of dye has been used, and number 2 is whether no cheating has been done. For example, a blue is available in the direct dye, blue is available in reactive dye, and blue is there in matte dyes as well. The cost of direct dye is, let us say, 100 rupees per kilo. This is 2000 rupees per kilo. This is about 450 rupees per kilo. So, in order to ensure that the customer is not cheated, some of the tests are being done to ensure that they have been dyed using the right type of the dye. So, I just mentioned about this various types of dyeing, and also cross dyeing. Suppose a fabric contains polyester and cotton, that is called cross dyeing. Union dyeing, that is fabric as a whole is dyed, that is called union dyeing. So different names are given for the products which are dyed by different methods. And I also mentioned about these melange yarns, in which a certain proportion of the fibers is dyed and then mixed with the undyed material to create certain effects in the fabric. So in that case the fibers are dyed, and tops are dyed in the woolen industry, that is, tops are something like sliver. Even in the case of the textile yarn, one thing that was not mentioned was the production of mass coloration or mass colored yarns. What are mass colored yarns? When the yarns are produced in the spinning method, certain pigments are added to that and we get that color. And those toes which have the color are cut and then the staple fibers are produced, which can be used in the manufacture of the yarn. So mass colored yarns are very advantageous in the sense that there is no need to dye the material again. And mass colored yarns have very good fastness properties compared to the yarns which are being dyed, but unfortunately the cost of production is quite high, and that prohibits the large scale production of these materials. So we have talked about something about dyeing and the dyes that are used for dyeing the material, the parameters that are involved in dyeing, and the machinery that is used in dyeing the material, and how the knitted fabrics are dyed, how the woven fabrics are dyed. We have talked about it. Dyed and printed fabrics. We are going to discuss the various stages of dyeing and printing fabrics, classics recognized by pattern printed fabrics, non-classic images, better quality prints, and resist prints. Stages of dyeing. Fiber stalk dye. It is used in jersey and the fiber contents are polyester, metallic and spandex. It is used in tanks and t-shirts. Fiber or stalk dyeing is the earliest dyeing opportunity for natural fibers. In addition to being extremely thorough and expensive, this stage of dyeing creates heather and tweed effects. If a yarn is removed and it is observed that each has several colors, which is the best way to identify stalk dyeing. Tweeds are also stalk dyed. Yarn dyed. The fiber content is cotton, which is used in shirting. Yarn dyed means that the yarns are dyed and then different colored yarns are brought together to create the fabric. And this can easily be identified by removing a yarn and the solid color is noticed. Piece dyed. This is a filament which is used, and it is used in shirting, blouses and dresses. Piece dyeing is a process of dyeing fabric. The piece is taken from the loom or solid colors except where a pattern has been placed on the goods by resist printing or later removed by discharge printing. Likewise, in cross dyeing stripes, iridescent effects or Oven colored patterns may be obtained by different dye affinities of the fibers employed in the fabric. Piece dyeing results in a solid color since the whole fabric is dyed at once. Although solution or dope dyeing appears the same, solid colored, dope dyeing is more thorough and more color fast than piece dyeing. It is also more expensive than piece dyeing. For this reason, most solid colored fabrics are piece dyed. Fiber dyed, yarn dyed and piece dyed. These examples are presented as a cross section of different stages of dyeing. Dope dyeing is not presented because it appears the same as piece dyeing in that it produces a solid color fabric. Cross dyed, re-embroidered hex net, point D esprit. The contents are 80% nylon and 20% rayon. The yarn is of filament and it is a textured one. It is used in evening, bridal and lingerie items. Characteristics: dyeing of stock yarn or fabric composed of two or more different fibers with varying dyeing properties. They can get dyed the same color or different colors. Fabric which is cross dyed is generally made of undyed yarns, and the dyeing of the different fibers is accomplished in one or two baths. Various colored effects are obtained in this manner. Fabric may also have a yarn dyed warp so that only the second material remains to be dyed. Cross dyeing is appropriate for fabrics made of two different fibers that are strategically placed within the fabric. In a single dye bath, two dye classes in the two different colors dye the fabric. The resulting fabric appears to be yarn dyed, yet the fabric was piece dyed, which is generally more economical. The benefit for the manufacturer is the ability to stock white fabric and dye it in several different colorways at the last moment. Duple print. Polyester is used in this, and spun yarn is used in the warp. It is used in blouses and dresses. Duple printing is the same or different designs on the face and back of cloth. Fabric is either passed through the printing machine in two separate operations or printed by a special machine called the duple printing machine, which prints both sides simultaneously. Duple print means that two sides of the fabric are printed with two different prints. Face and back are remarkably different for contrast. Some introduction about printing is required at this juncture. We have already spoken about dyeing. Now, what is the difference between dyeing and printing? Dyeing is a process which colors the entire fabric, but printing imparts color only at certain portions of the fabric, or let us say at localized points. And design is invariably created by printing, and printing is the cheapest form of creating the design. And printed articles find very good application in saris, in dress materials, and in ladies' dress material particularly. Some of the prints are quite attractive and then induce the person to purchase that one. And how printing is carried out, that is what we are going to discuss today. Now, in our childhood days, we would have taken a plate in which some letters were there, that is projected image, that is the Ovaltine. I have seen say some, and then we used to put a paper on that one and take the back of the pencil and then rub it on the paper, so that this impression is cast on the paper, and after that we used to have that pleasure that we have got that on the paper. That is nothing but a printing. And a rubber stamp, we just take the rubber stamp, immerse it in that paste color, and then press it on the paper where it is required, and after finding out our name and also the designation or whatever it is, we feel quite happy to see that one. That is again a form of printing. So, and even now it is existing. People who are illiterates, when they are asked to receive certain payment, they are asked to put their thumb impression because they don't know how to put their signature. So some ink is smeared on their thumb and then they are asked to fix on that to that register. Because the thumb impression doesn't change for a person even after several years, and that is the reason why the thumb impressions have been used as a method of identification of the person, and also for catching the pickpockets, that is called fingerprint. So fingerprints are used for nabbing these hardcore criminals and so many other things. So all that indicates printing. And the prints, how are they made? So we have got so many types of printing about which we will discuss, but let us talk something about the printing paste, something like the dye liquor which we spoke. Now in printing we use pigments and dyes also, but pigments are quite cheaper as compared to dyes. One example to illustrate how the pigment is fixed onto the material is, suppose we have a cover and the stamp has to be affixed at this corner. So we take that and then apply a little water on that one and it is fixed. In the same way, a pigment is applied onto the textile material, and pigments impart color, but they are not as fast as the dyes. On exposure to atmosphere or heat, the color is likely to fade. But nevertheless, pigments are used in dyeing, in printing and not in dyeing. And the printing paste is produced by using various chemicals. The pigments are used, and then what is called these thickening agents are used. So there is a formulation which is used for printing, and it is applied onto the fabric. Urea is used in that one to see that there is no drying of this printing paste. It ensures that the printing paste is wet always, which should be the case. If it gets dried, then application is not possible on that. Now, we were quite familiar with the printing of the textile materials, which was practiced several years ago. That was called Batik Printing. And traditionally, India was very famous for kalamkari prints. Then ikat, then tie and dye. These are all practiced in the cottage industry to provide certain effects in the sari. Now in weaving, when the yarns are passing through the loom, at certain portions the yarns are tied up and then dipped in the dye solution. And where the yarns are tied, the dyes won't be able to penetrate, and then it will remain undyed. The portions where the knots are not there will get dyed. So that is called tie and dye. This tie and dye gives a particular effect to the fabric. Some portions of the fabric appear to be dyed, some portions do not appear to be dyed, so it alternates, and that is the concept of this tie and dye. Ikat is also the same thing, and this traditional methods were used for producing saris. And kalamkari, that is the type of prints which are produced by using natural dyes. It is used in bedspreads and also pillowcases and all. So kalamkari is a traditional name that is given to the prints which were produced in ancient India. And block printing. Now let us say something about this batik printing. Suppose a fabric is taken and wax is applied at certain portions where we don't want the print to go, and other portions are dyed. That is the concept of this batik printing. So first, it may be that the fabric is impregnated in wax with some portions where it is not required, and then it is dyed, so that those portions where wax was not there will get the dye, and portions where wax was there will not take up the dye. That is called the batik dyeing. Then block printing. Block printing is nothing but the rubber stamp. a design is cast on the surface and it is printed on bags or on fabrics. It is a very slow process, but it is a tried in the cottage industry, and so many people are benefited by this very cheap method of printing. Bags are printed, jute bags and all that, by this method. And we have what is called as screen printing. In screen printing, a screen which contains the design is used, and the fabric is laid on a table. Suppose this is a screen which contains the design. It is kept on the top of that, and the printing paste is applied on the screen. There are holes in the screen which will allow the dye paste to traverse to the fabric, but places where the dye cannot be allowed to go are also there. So the design is imparted onto the fabric, and after that this fabric is taken up for developing the colors on that. There are two ways. One is putting the fabric in the hot sun, and the color gets fixed up. And screen printing requires a lot of space. First the material has to be kept on the table, and then the screens are to be used. But if the screens are produced with the designs, and a screen developing section is also included in the place where the printing is taking place, so several types of screens can be used for producing several designs, and the fabrics are being marketed. Screen printing is largely used in silk saris. Now this screen printing has been automated also. The fabric is moved, and then the screen is stationary, and then the impression is cast on the fabric. Instead of keeping the fabric at one place and moving the screen, the fabric is now allowed to go. This is called automatic screen printing equipment. And another version of this printing is roller printing. We have a roller which is engraved with a design. So when a fabric is passed on to that, the fabric gets the design, and it is having a higher production also, because the prints are applied onto the material at a faster rate. The same roller printing is called rotary screen printing. Here we can have 8 rollers having different designs, and the fabric is allowed to pass through that one, and different designs are created on the fabric. This is most essential for bedspreads. And for saris, screen printing is the most suitable equipment. And there was one printing method which was very popular, that is called the transfer printing. In the transfer printing, there is a paper which contains the design, and the film is peeled off, and then it is placed on the fabric and then heat pressed, so that the design is incorporated on the fabric. This transfer printing was applied to the kids' wear. And the production rates are quite high in this transfer printing. But only thing is the fabric has to be polyester. Otherwise the dye may not be taken up by this. Then there is a very interesting method of printing which is called burnt out printing. Here a fabric which consists of 67% polyester or 80-20 polyester cotton is taken, and then the weft 100% polyester is used, and the block that contains the design is fixed on this one, and sulfuric acid is used to remove these cellulosic component. So after printing, when the fabric is viewed through the light, we find holes on that, but some designs are also being created on the fabric. So that is the concept of the burnt out prints. In burnt out prints, it is very important that the warp and weft are intact even after burning out the other fibers. So 80% sulfuric acid is used. It should not cause a hole. Rather, a design is being produced on the fabric by making use of the solubility parameter of the cellulose using sulfuric acid. So that is the concept of these burnt out prints. And we have talked about the rotary screen printing, transfer printing, and printing is a very cheap method of importing design to the fabrics. And the effluent that is being evolved is also much less, unlike the dyeing industry. So invariably a printing unit has got so many advantages compared to a dyeing unit, in the sense that there are no problems of effluent in the printing unit, and it is a technique which is used for applying these prints on a fabric which contains defects as well. Even a fabric which contains a lot of weaving defects or some other blemishes, if prints are applied onto that, they cover up all those things and then enable the fabric to be sold at a reasonable price. So printing has been found to be a blessing in disguise, because it can be used for covering up the defects in the woven fabrics. And there are other types of printed fabrics also, moire prints, and the dyes are being applied onto the fabric for causing certain effects, the space dyeing as I call it and all. And today printing also has developed a lot. That is what is called as inkjet printing. In inkjet printing, the prints are obtained just like taking a print from the computer. So the fabric is passed through that machine and it does the print and it comes out of the machine. That is called inkjet printing. Just like we get a printout from the computer, the fabric is printed and then it is obtained. There is another way of printing the fabric using what are called discharge printing. This is used extensively in the printing of silk. In the discharge printing, first the fabric is dyed. And we use a discharging agent. Rangolite is a commercial name. It is formaldehyde it contains. So when it is applied onto the fabric which contains the dye, it will remove the dye from the portion where it is applied. That is discharging. And a white portion will occur. Now it can be left as it is, or some other color can be printed in that white portion. This is a concept of this discharge style of printing. And the silk fabrics are eminently suitable for this type of printing, and saris are printed using this technique. It can be done on cotton as well. And the important points are that the discharging agents are to be selected very carefully, because they should not damage the fabric, and the concentration of the discharging agent is of utmost importance. And the dyes that we use also, there are certain dyes which are dischargeable. So we will have to identify those dyes which are possible, which are capable of being discharged when discharging agents are applied onto them, and then the printing is carried out on them. Calico, or called Ditsi print. This is made out of rayon, which is a spun yarn. It is used in blouses, shirting and dresses. It is an inexpensive, brightly printed cotton cloth woven with carded yarns in a plain weave. Originally, a plain weave light fabric printed cotton cloth of Indian origin, and later was applied to various cotton goods until the end of the 17th century. Similar to percale, which has virtually replaced it in the market today, the early Calicos were beautiful elaborate designs of animals, birds, trees and flowers, or simple all over space pattern, sometimes both wet combined in one cloth. Later, calicos were coarse fabric, machine printed with small all over patterns, derived from Calicut, city in India where the fabric was first made and printed and dyed or painted with wood blocks. Originally, it was used for decorative purposes and later it was used for house dresses and aprons. Toile du Joy. This fabric name is Toile du Joy. It is made out of cotton, which is a spun yarn. It has got uses as top weight and accessories, a floral or scenic design on cotton, linen or silk fabric. Printed cotton fabrics imported from India had become so popular in France in the late 18th century that several attempts were made to imitate them. The first man who achieved any degree of prominence was Christopher Philipp Oberkampf, a German who established a factory of joy near Versailles. He was the first to have any success producing fast colors, to engrave cylinders and copper plates, the first to produce a solid green in a single operation, and to apply steam in the process of dyeing. The most famous prints from Joy are in single colors printed from engraved copper plates. Oberkampf achieved such success that the same joy has been definitely associated with finely printed fabrics, following the types he developed ever since that time. The designs are characterized by classic motifs beautifully engraved and finely colored. Disperse and Toile du Ga. These fabrics are originally of the cotton fiber family. They are easily identified by the distinctly recognizable patterns. Then non-classic images, printed fabrics. Direct print. Fabric name is jersey. The fiber contents are polyester and rayon, and the yarn is a spun one. It is used in top tanks, t-shirts. Characteristics. In a direct print, the foreground is printed on a white or undyed background. This is the simplest and least expensive print, using one less screen as the background is not printed. Blotch print. This is used in slub jersey and the uses are in t-shirts and banks. Blotch print uses one or more screen or roller than a direct print as the background is printed. Overprint. An overprint also has a background, but this one has been dyed instead of printed. This fabric is printed over a previously dyed fabric. The back and front of the background are the same and it is a heathered grey. There are certain similarities between the direct print, blotch print and overprint. If a pattern is recognizable, such as Calico, then the fabric is simply called Calico. If a pattern is not readily recognizable, then the one could default to one of these three print types based on print processes. Notice that these three fabrics are very popular animal prints and each of them is a simple jersey. The difference is the basic print process or number of screens used. Quality prints. Under this, discharge printing will be discussed. A fabric contains rayon, which is a filament yarn, and discharge printing is a method of printing with chlorine or other color destroying chemicals on a fabric already dyed so as to bleach out or discharge the color on the parts printed. This yields a white pattern on a colored ground. Colored patterns on a dyed ground are possible in this method by adding to the bleaching paste a dye not affected by the bleaching agent used, so that another color is substituted for white on the dyed ground. This fabric does not need to stop at black and white. However, extra screens or rollers can add more color into the fabric. It is easy to recognize a discharge printing because the pattern is visible on both sides. The next is heat transfer print. This is done on a polyester spandex fabric, and It is a method which transfers design from rolls of papers to polyester or other thermoplastic fibers. Designs are pre-printed with dispersed dyes and under high temperature of 400 degrees Fahrenheit are transferred onto fabric when both are passed through a heat transfer printing machine. Dispersed dyes are the only dyes that can sublimate and therefore the only ones that can be used. An adaptation of the decalcomania method. Since only synthetics have an affinity for this dye, it is generally printed on nylon or polyester tricots or jerseys. Heat transfer prints are generally recognizable because there is no bleed through to the other side. Heat transfer paper. This is heat transfer paper that has not yet been used. The paper has been printed with dispersed dyes. The color is lighter although the paper has not yet been used. In sublimation, the dye turns into a gas and transfer sublimates onto the fabric. Flock print. A type of printing consisting of the application of flocks, very short fibers, to the surface of a fabric by means of an adhesive. The flocks may be contained in the adhesive paste or they may be dusted onto it or applied by means of an electrostatic charger to hold them effect. They are used to print dots and figures on fabric, especially lightweight or sheer fabric. Then velvet burnt out. Burnt out is created with a fabric made of two different fibers, one that is cellulose and one that is not. This velvet fabric is made of rayon, cellulosic and silk protein. The fabric is printed with a chemical that destroys the cellulose, leaving the protein or non-cellulose intact. In this fabric, the rayon is burnt away, leaving the silk ground weave intact. Batiste burnt out. This burnt out also uses two fibers but not as a velvet. It is made of a coarse spun yarn and the outside layer of the yarn is cotton. The burning away of the outside layer creates a transparency in the resulting thinner yarns. This fabric is flat and not three-dimensional. Jersey burnt out. This burnt out is accomplished in a process much like rock tumbling. The jersey is placed in a tumbler like a giant dryer with rocks and chemicals that selectively or randomly remove some of the fibers. Today it is often simply printed in a randomly appearing design. Knit foil lame. This is a more contemporary version of the concept of lame. It is a jersey with a foil overlay or print for maximum pizzazz. The fiber contents are polyester and spandex. It is used as evening wear. Laser print. This print is etched with a laser which selectively cuts holes through the fabric. The laser replaces the chemical in burnout. The fabric is later printed with a pigment over a dyed fabric. Resist prints. Tie dyeing is a hand method of dyeing which produces designs on fabric. It is used in blouses, dresses, evening wear. Small portions of the fabric are gathered and tied tightly with string or thread. The fabric is then dyed, but the tied areas resist the penetration of the dye and produce the irregular dots or stripes on dyed ground. This method of decorating fabrics is found most frequently in India and Indonesia. The effect has been imitated by machine dyeing. Tie dyeing is also done with groups of yarns. Yarns from various groups are selected to make a pattern in the weft of the fabric. Tie dye is a generic term for a group of fabrics that are used in some way to resist the dye that is later applied. Fabric can be tied in concentric circles, sewn and pleated or clamped. Many variations are possible with this method. The tie dye is a more organic form than batik or ikat. Batik. Batik is a method of resist dyeing which employs wax as the resist. The pattern is covered with wax and the fabric is then dyed. The waxed patterns will not take the dye. Wax is removed after dyeing by boiling the fabric or applying solvent or benzene. The process is repeated to obtain multicolored designs. Patterns have a distinct Javanese character and range from simple to intricate themes. Blue, brown and orange colors are usually used. The fabric is often streaked where the dye has gone through cracks in the wax. and the effect is sometimes imitated in machine prints. If the fabric has 6 colors, there would be 6 different waxing and dye applications. Batik is easily distinguished by the cracked wax designs evident in the fabric. Batik dyeing is originated in Indonesia, where it was employed on cotton. Ikat. Ikat is a resist form of fabric decoration. A textile fabric is called an ikat when the yarn is tied for dyeing and weaving purposes, as distinct from tying the whole fabric. Derived from Malayan word mengikat, meaning to tie, knot, bind or wind around. The ikat technique can be applied to the warp, the filling or both, and called warp ikat, filling ikat or double ikat respectively. A technique of great antiquity which developed in northeastern Asia and spread to India, Malaya and Africa. Ikat designs appear as reflections in water, therefore the blurry effect. Tie, dye, batik and ikat have got a lot of similarities. That some parts of the fabric is tied up or treated with a substance to resist the dye. Each is then dyed in an immersion process, which is why the design is evident on both sides. Traditionally, these fabrics made of plain weave cotton. Today, resist prints can be found on many fibers and fabrics. Tie and dye has a more organic, random color application than batik or ikat. Batik is made with wax, and the cracked wax lines are usually evident in the distinct design. The threads in an ikat are tie-dyed, and the images have soft feathered edges, since it is difficult to get all the threads lined up perfectly. Let us talk about the printing. Generally in printing, both pigments and dyes can be used, but pigments are used in view of the fact that they are cheaper. They are insoluble organic coloring matter and are applied on the cloth by resin bonding, and acrylamide binder resin is normally used. So when resin is used, then this pigment remains in that resin and then it functions. Now let us see the recipe that is used in printing. Recipe means the ingredients that are used for preparing the printing paste and then to apply that onto the fabric. Generally, we use an emulsifier and a binder and turpentine and water. The whole thing is made up of 100%. Let us see an example of that. Binder is 10%. Kerosene or mineral turpentine, mineral is 80%. Emulsifier is 1% and water 9%. So the total is made up of 100%. And the print paste, this is what is called the stock paste. So the print paste consists of stock paste 95%, catalyst 1% and pigment dye X%. So the binder is added to the kerosene under high speed stirring along with the emulsifier and water. The color paste is prepared by mixing the stock paste and pigment color using a stirrer and adding the catalyst, which is ammonium chloride. Fabric is printed with pigment color paste and dried in the printing machine and baked at 150 degrees centigrade for 5 minutes in a polymerizer. Since the pigment color is adhering to the fabric through the binder coating, the fastness properties of pigment prints depend on proper curing polymerization of the binder. However, the rubbing fastness dry and wet of pigment prints is somewhat inferior. Now let us see how the printing can be carried out using a reactive dye. Following recipe, %6 sodium alginate paste, 80% sodium bicarbonate, 2.5%, reactive dye H brand, in fact I pointed out that vinyl sulfone dyes are most suitable for this printing. X% because the shade depends on the requirements. Urea 5%, resist salt 1%, wetting agent 1%, water 5%. The printed and dry cloth is steamed in a loop steamer at 100 to 110 degrees centigrade for 7 to 8 minutes and then washed and soaked in an open soaper. The print paste for vinyl sulfone colors is same as above but without alkali. After printing and drying, the fixation is done by silicate pad batch or padding with hot silicate shock fixation. For pad batch sodium silicate, the fixing is done by silicate pad batch method, and for this pad batch sodium silicate 120 degrees to idle 800 parts, caustic soda 70 degrees to idle 100 parts and water 100 parts. The density of the made up liquor is 102 degree twaddle. The printed fabric is padded and batched for 3 to 4 hours and then washed and soaked. For pad shock fixation, sodium silicate is made up to 106 degree twaddle and boiled. The printed cloth is padded through the boiling silicate solution and washed and soaked. So these are all the particulars for printing the fabric using these reactive dyes. Now we shall deal with the printing using wet dyes. As it is known that wet dyes are known for very good fastness properties, and this involves printing, drying and steaming using steam. Now let us have a look at the typical printing paste. %10 maize starch, British gum thickening, 600 parts. Rangolite, C, 200 parts. Soda ash or potassium carbonate, (60 parts). Anthraquinone powder, (10 parts). Vat color, X, that means concentration will vary depending on the shade. Water, 50 parts. So it is 1000 parts here, and the steaming condition is 9 to 10 minutes in saturated steam. Saturated steam using ager. Potassium carbonate is preferred rather than soda ash because it is deliquescency which aids moisture pickup in the steamer and also helps to bring about a rapid temperature rise in the steamer by virtue of its high heat of solution. This contributes to a better color value and minimum shade variation of the print. So this is the recipe that is used for printing the fabric using vat dyes, and vat dyes give very good fastness property. Now let us have a look at the resist print. As it is known that vat dyes are known for very good fastness properties, and this involves printing, drying and steaming using steam. Now let us have a look at the typical printing paste. (10% maize starch, British gum thickening, (600 parts), Rangolite, C, 200 parts, soda ash or potassium carbonate, (60 parts), Anthraquinone powder, (10 parts), vat color, X, that means concentration will vary depending on the shade. Water, 50 parts. So it is 1000 parts here, and The steaming condition is 9 to 10 minutes in saturated steam. Saturated steam using ager. Potassium carbonate is preferred rather than soda ash because it is deliquescency which aids moisture pickup in the steamer and also helps to bring about a rapid temperature rise in the steamer by virtue of its high heat of solution. This contributes to a better color value and minimum shade variation of the print. So, this is the recipe that is used for printing the fabric using vat dyes, and vat dyes give very good fastness property. Now, let us have a look at the resist print. Here the resist printing is done with resist chemicals dried and then padded through reactive colors and then fixed by dry heat fixation or steaming in loop ager. There are white and color resist prints. General recipe. White resist and color resist. Starch British gum. (600 parts). Here it is 700 parts. Titanium dioxide. One is to one. 100 parts. Nothing. Citric acid. 100 to 120 parts. 80 to 100 parts. Color emulsion. Print 60 to 80 parts. Water X parts. So this is the general recipe and reactive padding recipe we shall see. Now you find that the color emulsion pigment is not there in the white resist because whatever color that has been removed, it is kept like that, whereas here another color is being introduced. Reactive padding recipe. Reactive dye, (10 to 60 parts). Urea 50 to 100 parts. Resist salt 10 parts. Sodium bicarbonate 15 to 25 parts. Water X part. Now let us see the discharge printing. This is a very interesting way of printing the fabrics, especially the silk fabrics, about which it was mentioned earlier. So, cotton also can be printed by using this technique. First of all, the fabric is dyed, and then we use a discharging agent to remove colors from a specific portion of the fabric. If a discharging agent which is capable of removing the dye from that cloth is used, then a white portion forms. But in that white portion, if some color is introduced, then it adds some variety to the fabric. So now let us have a look at the recipe for discharge printing. First, the fabric is dyed using the reactive color and with azoic color also. So white discharge. Azoic ground. Reactive ground. So we use starch, British gum paste, (500 parts), soda ash, (60 to 80 parts), (40 to 60 parts), Rangolite, C, 100 to 200 parts, 100 to 150 parts, glycerin, (30 to 50 parts), 30 parts, anthraquinone, PDR, dispersed in water, (30 to 50 parts), caustic soda, (70° twaddle), 30 to 50 parts, 10 to 30 parts, zinc oxide, (1 is to 1) in water, 100 parts, 100 parts, water, X. So this is for white discharge. Now let us see what is the recipe that is used for the color discharge. That means in the white portion color is being introduced. Starch, British gum, paste, 500 parts, soda ash, 60 parts, rangolite, C, 80 to 150 parts, glycerin, 30 to 150 parts, color paste, pigment, 60 to 120 parts, water, X parts. This rangolite is used to destroy the color that is present in the dyed material and enables any other color to be introduced in that portion. So this is the recipe for the color discharge. Now we shall give you some information about printing using fluorescent pigments. Fluorescent pigments are used for taking advantage of the light that is falling on that. Even fluorescent dyes are used in cases where the purpose is required. For example, in the dark, a policeman controlling the traffic, his dress is made of this fluorescent dyes. So fluorescent pigments also will satisfy the same purpose of that. A fluorescent material emits light when some other light falls on it, and there is no need to say ignite it or to create some light in that material. So printing with fluorescent pigments. Recipe: 4% carboxymethyl cellulose, 100 parts, emulsifier, binder, 300 parts, urea, 50 parts, kerosene, 330 to 280 parts, fluorescent pigment, (150 to 200 parts), diammonium phosphate, 1:3, that is 30 parts. Then fixer, CCl, 20 parts. So this gives you an idea about the recipe that is used in printing using these fluorescent pigments. In printing, what is required is a clear print which is free from the defects. So any defect that is present in the printing will reflect very badly on the fabric and will lead to rejection. And the way that the fabric is printed and also the print is being fixed onto the material play a vital role in ensuring a clear print on the fabric. And some of these recipes may be replaced by some new other recipes also, but anyway, to give you an idea about the recipe, all this information has been provided.